There has been countless articles about lack of lead testing in schools. Now, granted, schools are traditionally old buildings, so they have the old infrastructure, they have the old lead service pipes. This is like nationwide, all over. And I think California has free lead testing, and the majority of the schools have not taken advantage of getting their lead tested. Like, of course, the first instinct is to point fingers. Like, what is going on?
Yeah, so it's one of those things, right? Like, you kind of nailed it. This is happening all over the place. Mm-hmm. There's no way around it. Like, there were some stories last year about New York City schools.
Right.
There were some stories about, some schools in the Chicago area. And,
right.
and the reality is, even though we're still seeing all these articles pop up all over the place,
mm-hmm.
you kind of alluded to it. Like, the problem is much bigger. Schools just aren't testing for it. So
right.
you can't, be aware of a problem unless you're willing to
do something about
do
it.
something to even see if it's a real thing.
Right.
And most schools just aren't doing that.
Right.
Even in the case of California, like you said, it's free, and they're still choosing not to do it, which is,
and that's
questionable.
That's at best, right?
Yeah.
And so even I think we hear a lot about like schools, like elementary, middle, and high schools. But one area that we don't hear a lot about is like child care facilities, mm-hmm. like daycare centers. And I think it gets a little tricky there because daycare centers can be in like commercial buildings, mm-hmm. but they can also be in people's homes.
Yep.
And so there are only 7 states that require lead testing in daycare facilities. So that's like the Washington State, that it's 7.
I'm surprised that there's 7.
Right.
Because, realistically, like a lot of these regulations on residences are around lead paint, right? Like a lot of times the water is just flat out ignored. So I was even unaware that there were some states that required any kind of lead testing.
Right. Test after test, study after study has proven that kids are the most susceptible to lead poisoning. You would think that because kids are more susceptible to incurring harm from lead exposure, that there would be more solid and concrete testing of the water supply.
I mean, I think this is one of those things you got to look at the incentives, right? Like what is the incentive to do so, right? Mm-hmm. So you have these municipalities, particularly schools, are under these intense budget restrictions, mm-hmm. right? Like mm-hmm. budgets right now, it's not like money is flowing like crazy.
Right. Very true.
That's the reality of it. Teacher pay is down, all that. So that's a completely separate issue.
Right.
But, it's like one of these things where it's like, well, if you do the testing, then you're kind of on the hook for fixing the problem mm-hmm. that we all kind of know is there, and you can be willfully ignorant of it if you just don't do the testing. So unless you have, let's look at a scenario. Let's say a state makes its municipalities do lead testing for the water. Mm-hmm. It's like an unfunded mandate, right? So it's like we're requiring you to do the test. We know that there's going to be some problems that pop up, but we have no funding on the back end
to give you to fix it. Right.
So it's like one of these things. It's like, what do you do in that case? This is one of those things in my mind where like the local communities actually need to kind of rise up.